So I'm going to take a kind of another round of questions to the panelists, right, from me, and then it becomes your turn. So start to think about that possibility. I wanted to step back a little bit from the long-term perspective that Rolf was finishing with, but to get into the question of security. And I must admit that I'm always a little bit nervous when I use concepts like the security dimensions of the refugee issue. I'm worried that somebody is going to be hearing me say something completely different from what I intend. Because I think that as one thinks about that, the issue of politics being toxic, if you start to say refugee crisis and security issues in the same sentence, you do start to raise some kind of simple images of attack or sovereignty under threat and so on. But if we try and park those over one side and say that's not what we're talking about, what do you think are connections between the big issues of peace and security that we think about and the situation with refugees today?
Linking that to Europe or in general?
As you like.
Okay. I think what sort of stands out and actually refers back to your other question, the former question, I think that the refugee and the way we talk about refugees in Europe has been securitized. It has become a security problem. I think this comes from earlier we thought of refugees and larger migration flows were more thought of as a burden to our social welfare, for example, to our political systems or to cohesion. But now they are to a larger extent securitized, to think of them as a security threat, almost as if Europe is we have facing an existential crisis of some sort because of large migration flows and especially refugee flows from the Middle East. And I think this is very worrying. And I think this is the securitization in itself is a security problem. And of course, if it also stirs up a lot of fear among individuals and local communities. But of course, if you feel that a lot of people that will come to your local, to your city or your local area or your country or to the EU, if that means that you are under security threat, of course you would want to distance yourself to that. If you think that ISIS are hiding in refugee flows from Syria and they're planning, the next terrorist attack on Stockholm, of course you would want to avoid that. You would want to distance yourself from that. And the way to, the increasing trend to securitize refugee flows, to talk about them when we talk about crime, organized crime, when we talk about, criminal networks, when we talk about weapon smuggling, when we talk about terrorist attacks. I think this is a security problem. And I think we're forgetting, so as I sort of my point before, the humanitarian dimension, the humanitarian crisis that we are facing, which is not really a choice for us. Of course, we didn't create the problem, and we would like to solve the problem in the region by stopping the war in Syria. But in the meantime, we are facing a lot of people having to escape, and we have an international legal obligation to receive them and host them and actually protect these people in need. And it's not helpful to securitize that kind of discussion, and I think that creates a lot of resentment in Europe and a lot of opposition, which makes sense if you actually believe that you are under security threat from external sort of migration flows, then you will react in a very different way compared to if you see civilians escaping war and would actually have liked to stay in their home country, for example, and they don't have some sort of vicious or aggressive plan in mind when they move. So
okay, but let me put you on the spot and ask you what you say to somebody who says, yes, but there are people from ISIS who are coming in those flows of refugees. What they are over dinner. Somebody, a friend, surprised you by saying, but it's true. There is that threat.
It is. It's a difficult question to answer, but it's not so surprising question because it actually happens at dinners nowadays. It didn't used to happen, but I do get this sorts of comment when explaining what kind of work we do at SIPRI. I think we have, I mean, the EU asylum policy and the system that we have do have this in mind. I mean, we do have a system where we have to register and identify people, make sure that they are, legitimate refugees or asylum seekers. There is a process for doing that, and of course, then you need to work with intelligence. You need to work with security police, with law enforcement. Whether the question is that people slip through anyway, in spite of these individual checks on people. I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that you commit a war crime, for example, and then in let's say in the genocide in Rwanda, you're taken as a refugee and you leave the country, and then 20 years later, there is an investigation leading you to. So I mean, it has happened in the past. And I think one of the reasons why there are so many, hundreds of thousands of people stuck at the EU's external borders, because they're awaiting this sort of assessment. And this is really the problem with the system that we have. How do we make a quick assessment whether someone is a refugee, or someone is a war criminal, or someone is a terrorist? And how do we do that quickly when we have, a million people pressing? So, so the answer is that we should have a system which do both.
How do we do that quickly when the governments are not cooperating together properly? I'm moving on to your side of the argument now. I'm answering the question that this idiot asked me at the dinner table, right? Because it seems to me that the more that governments, the more that people, the more that the media, the more that opinion makers turn away from cooperation on this kind of issue, then the harder it is to handle, because cooperation means there's more resources engaged. And part of what you're saying is simply the scale of the problem is such that it demands that cooperation.
Definitely we need, I think this is obvious to a lot of people, but we need an integrated approach to our external borders. Since we do have joint external borders, we cannot assume that Greece would be able to set up this procedure on their own and would have the resources and the capacity to implement it. So this is something, of course, that we would have to develop together. We could never eliminate all risks, and there will always be errors, but as it looks now, we have more to fear from sort of homegrown terrorism than people slipping through the asylum system.
So, Marcello, if I start again with you with the same question I asked Lena at the beginning there. How do you understand the security connections or ramifications of the situation of refugees?
Yes, I have another point of view, another way of approaching this problem, but I would like to add something to your points. I've been also working on terrorism in the past, on my research activities and so on. And let's suppose that 10 members of ISIS had passed through the Greek islands last year. Maybe they are much less. Maybe they are just 2 or 3, as the evidence tells us. 10. About 1 million of persons came to Europe last year. So 10 people, 1 million of people. Think about how how many criminals there are in Sweden in the jails under a criminal trial, or even for bloody crimes. How many there are in Italy or in the whole Europe? So if we take this figure as justifying a policy response, or let's say a sort of mobilization of the media leaders, we're going nowhere. We have completely forgotten about rationality, because there are 10, 5, maybe 4 members of ISIS who did the trip to Syria and then they came back through the Turkey-Greek border. But is this enough to justify a closure of the borders? And moreover, if we build up a mega wall around Europe protecting us from the enemies that are outside, do we think that the number of the enemies will decrease? I think about what is going on in the Idonemi camp at the border between Macedonia and Greece. in this no man's land with no rights, no respect for the people, where elder people, young people, families are left there, forgotten by Europe. What happened in the Calais jungle, this is something we should be ashamed of. And I think if I were terrorist recruiters, I would know where to go. I would go there, and every day I would be speaking at the ears of someone. Look at Europe; they are our enemies. Let's do something very bad against them because they don't deserve respect. They don't respect us, so we have to kill them. All of them, they are guilty. So we should also think about the propaganda. Fanatism is the step before terrorism. So if we adopt these kind of policies of closure, of treating normal people as potential terrorists or a threat to us, at the end we will do the game of the terrorists, the real ones. And I would like to add another thing.
Go ahead.
I think everyone here has heard about the expression Fortress Europe. I think it's very used by many NGOs that are very, let's say, on one side on some occasion. I don't like to use slogans, but it's true that from a legal and also from a policy point of view, in the last 20 years, not in the last 2 months, in the last 20 years, Europe has built a system whose results are excluding from a possibility, from a chance to come legally many potential migrants, not only economic migrants, but also for family reunification purposes or for asylum. And so we leave no other chance to these people that they don't want to be irregular migrants. They wouldn't like to come that way. They would like to come legally, but they don't have any other chance. So they choose the irregular way, and so they enter into a very dangerous market, that is the smuggling of migrants market. And this market is very profitable. So this is a problem of security for Europe, because the money generated by this market is going in someone's hands. Let's ask to each other which hands. The hands of organized crime, the hands sometimes of terrorist organizations, the hands of persons who destabilize governments who are in our neighborhood. So if there is destabilization in North Africa, in Middle East, in Eastern Europe, it's a problem of security of Italy, of Sweden, of Ireland, of Norway, or every European state. So this is an issue of security generated by a wrong migration policy. It is not done in the last 2 years, but in the last 20 years. So maybe we should really think about the way we treat migration flows. We must not dramatize migration. Migration is a common phenomenon, it's a physiological phenomenon. It will exist always. It has been always existed. Maybe, I don't know if Sweden has known a period of emigration in its history. I'm not so expert of Sweden history, but for instance, many of the European countries that now are claiming for restrictive migration policies, they have received many benefits by emigration. But our memory is too short. Maybe this is a problem.